Pseudopod is extruded into this universe from a dimension of purest fear. It's beautiful in its own alien way, but what's to come will unsettle you. Pseudopod, episode 634, February 8th, 2019. This week's story, Flash on the Borderlands, the Accursed and the Monstrous.
Lead me to a lonely place, dressed for opening time. Show me bleeding where my love burns you breathing fire.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Pseudopod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alistair, your host, and you'll notice that this side of Maple Street is much quieter than the other one, more reserved. It's not that who's over there is any nicer than what's over here, you understand, it's just this side is a little more honest. And speaking of honesty, our first story this week has a title whose meaning I'm unclear on. Ecdysis by Kurt Hunt was previously published at Kaleidotrope in 2016 and is read for us by Hollis Munro. While you listen, I'm going to go and look up the definition. I suspect it might be spoilery. After all, what's a definition but an unequivocally true story?
The crowd is roaring and their fists are thrown up in the air. Lay down, woman, don't be scared.
Ecdysis by Kurt Hunt. Only one rule. Do not speak to them. Even when they crawl into your room at night, their claws gripping the floorboards, do not speak to them. Even when their breath is hot on your tightly closed eyes, their double-jointed elbows braced against the headboard above you, do not speak to them. Even when they chitter about their loneliness, do not speak to them. You knew the rule. Your grandfather taught it to you before you could read. He tucked you in one night, and you breathed the cedar smells of the cabin at the foot of the ridge, and asked, "When is she coming home?" Strange, the way he turned his face away. "She's not," he said to the wall after a long silence, then turned back and told you, "When they come, and they will come, do not speak to them." You knew the rule, but you didn't understand it. Maybe grandfather did, but he's been gone for many years, while your conviction faded and your resolve weakened. Eventually, the weight of their carapaces became too much, too familiar to bear alone. You felt your lips part one night, and you heard your voice rasp at them in the darkness. And now look at you. No more grandfather, no more cabin, no more softness. You left those scraps in your bed. Nothing now but gnawing hunger, that hollowed-out feeling in your armor as your chitinous legs scrape against the others, as you whisper about your loneliness to a succession of faces, all of them closed to you. Sometimes you think one will break, but the lips only ever form the words in silence. Do not speak to them. Do not speak to them.
Ecdysis. The process of shedding the old skin in reptiles or casting off the outer cuticle in insects and other arthropods. See? Spoilers. The things we don't look at. The uncomfortable nods to the horrors on this and that side of the street. That's your space, this is mine. Stay in it and we won't have any trouble. The complex threads of threat assessment and ego, of politeness and hunger holding everyone together, holding everyone up, until you hear the scissors, or perhaps, in this case, the mandibles. How about a little music? Lisa Baldinelli and Larissa Thompson are happy to oblige. Lisa's story, Viens jouer avec moi, is a Pseudopod original read with grace and delicacy by Marissa. So, open the box. Let's see the truth about what's inside it.
Viens jouer avec moi by Lisa Baldinelli. Narrated by Larissa Thompson. Mummy, the young girl asked quietly, where did you get the music box? I want one for my own. The mother looked down at her daughter, taking in her alabaster skin, rose-tinted cheeks, and wide, innocent eyes as if it were the last time she'd ever see them in person. It's so pretty, Mummy. Can't I please just play with yours? She tried again. The mother began to tremble, lips quivering. Listen to me, Violetta, the older woman pleaded. That box is not a toy. You cannot just play with it as you please. She knelt down and brushed her daughter's hair behind her ear. Her hands held her head delicately between them as she begged. Please, darling, do not touch my music box. Violetta let out a defeated nod and complied with her mother's wishes, for the time being. Day after day she would pass her mother's expansive boudoir, littered with rich jewels of all colors and fine fabrics of all patterns, eyeing the music box dreamily, and then continuing on her merry way. Day after day she would pass, interest in the music box rising like the tide, her curiosity being further piqued with every view of the mysterious container. Curiosity, that treacherous black widow, spun the young, defenseless cherub in her web, trapping her forever. Darling, her mother's voice rose from the living room, would you be a dear and fetch my emerald scarf? I believe it lies on the top of my bureau. Violetta nodded, then scurried off. She entered her parents' bedroom in search of the item her mother requested. The room was essentially a mirror image of itself in structural layout, with each side occupied by either her father's or her mother's belongings. Her father's always on the left, her mother's always on the right. Her eyes locked on to the accessory on the right side of the room instantly. Within a few steps, the soft fabric was in her hands, uncovering the music box that laid underneath. She stared at the intricate wood carving for a moment, admiring its beauty, and then turned around to return to her mother. Viens jouer avec moi. Violetta stopped in her tracks, facing the door on her father's half of the room. While she did not recognize the delicate, enticing voice, she did, however, recognize the words the voice spoke. Come play with me. Viens jouer avec moi, the voice repeated, light and airy with a pleasing hum underlying her tone. The young girl turned around in search of the owner of the voice, but saw no one. Violetta, the voice purred, viens jouer avec moi. She stepped forward, drawn towards the music box once more. The mysterious woman sang out again in her hauntingly melodic voice. Violetta felt an overwhelming desire to answer the voice's clarion call, despite her mother's warning sounding off in the back of her mind. Viens ici, mon doux enfant, the voice encouraged. She nodded at her words. Come here, my sweet child, and erased all doubt from her thoughts, thus moving to stand directly in front of her mother's dresser. Her hand lifted and touched the top of the music box, smoothing her fingers over the edge, then gripped it and meticulously lifted the lid up. A soft tune comprised of twinkling bells emanated from within. The girl peered into the box and looked at the figurine that was twirling to the song. The ballerina was posed in a typical form, one Violetta had seen and had accomplished herself many times before, arms above her head, raised up on the tips of her toes, and eyes gently closed as a look of pure serenity washed over her porcelain face. Oh, how she wished to be as beautiful and happy as the graceful ballerina was. "Violetta." The voice was louder, but somehow just as gentle as before. She lifted her small, slender fingers and reached out towards the twirling woman. The music began to swell around her, building in an intensity and drawing the child closer and closer. Finally, her fingers brushed against the head of the ballerina, and she cried out. Her eyes shut tightly as she released her mother's scarf, allowing it to freely float to the floor. Everything was dark. The only noise she heard was the song of the music box playing again, back to its soft tune. She tried to move, but found she was unable. "Darling," her mother called, "is everything all right?" "Mummy!" she tried to scream. "Mummy, please help me!" "Yes, Mummy, I just dropped your scarf on the floor," she heard her voice explain. "Well, hurry, dear, we need to leave soon." She heard her mother's footsteps, along with her voice, fade away, leaving her alone. Except she wasn't alone just yet. The dreamy voice she had once trusted spoke over the quiet music, saying only one thing. "Au revoir, Violetta." The music stopped instantly.
Dancing forever in the dark. A memory trapped in amber and aware of its presence and existence and of whatever has replaced it out in the world, but unable to see what that is doing. Prisons, inside prisons, inside prisons, and the only thing you can ever hope for is a victim to take your place. Horror Flash done right has so many layers to it, and this is Horror Flash done exceptionally well. Thank you both. I love the London Underground. I always have done. I remember the very first time I went to London, being amazed at the people and the speed and the city under the city and everything. Every time I've gone back, I've just reinforced that love for it. It's ridiculous, sprawling, the country I live in at its best when it is so often, at the moment, at its worst. Our next story is set there. End of the Line by Paul Alex Gray is read for you by the wonderful Trendane Sparks. So listen carefully, because that isn't the end of the tunnel approaching. That's a true story.
End of the Line by Paul Alex Gray. Narrated by Tren Sparks.
"Look, Daddy, a girl is in there."
Adam nodded absent-mindedly while fighting to unfurl the soggy tube map. Throngs of passengers pushed past, up the stairs, and into the rain. Now, were we meant to switch to the Northern or the Piccadilly line? "Jess," said Adam, "we need to go back to the platform." He looked up from the map and looked to the near-empty corridor, but his daughter was nowhere to be seen. His heart sank and he gulped. "Jess," he said loudly. He dashed along the corridor and up the stairs. A few commuters were hurrying away as a black cab drove by, spilling water onto the pavement. "Jess, where are you?" He ran back through the corridor as a rumbling sound grew, the deep thudding booms of a train moving somewhere above, or maybe below. A gust of air came, hot and tinged with brake oil and smoke. He was just about to check the platform when a flash of color caught his eye. Turning, he saw a metal grill in the wall, and within it, something moving. Blue. Her dress. "Jess!" he cried incredulously. Adam knelt, grabbing the edges of the grill, pulling in vain. "Jess, stay there!" The figure turned. A pallid face with eyes like blots of soot stared back. "No," gasped Adam. It was a girl. She wore a blue dress. It couldn't have been Jess. The girl ran away as Adam's stomach churned. Was that Jess? Had she fallen, wandered somewhere? "Jess!" he cried.
"She won't hear you, mate. Not from out there,"
came a raspy voice. Looking up, Adam noticed a vent set in the ceiling tiles. Within, a pair of eyes stared back. A grizzled man's face caked with dirt and soot. Who are you? Shouted Adam. What have you done with her?
She's come in, mate. Come to find someone. Everyone comes in for someone else.
Another train began to rumble in the walls. Warm air spilled out from the grill, and with it, the faintest hint of a voice.
Daddy. You can find her, mate,
said the man.
Just come in.
Adam roared, grasping the grill, pulling so hard he tore skin. With a crash, the metal door swung open. He leaned into a dim space, lit by amber bulbs that cast a sickly glow. With bloody hands, he hauled himself into a narrow passage lined with cables and pipes.
Yeah, that's right,
came the man's voice.
The good ones always come in.
Adam shimmied along, following the passage left, then right. Every turn led to another, and soon he couldn't see the bright light of the corridor. Delving deeper, his clothes began to tear, and his skin grew slick with grime and soot. She must be in here. I'll find her. I'll search the whole place. The tunnels echoed with the noise of trains, booms and thunderous sighs, screeches, and somewhere deep within, he was certain, the sound of a girl's voice.
Here's what Paul had to say about this story. In the summer, my daughter and I rode our bikes to the library. She sat on the grass while I returned some books. It only took a moment, but when I came back, she was gone, and my heart dropped. I called out her name but couldn't find her. I shouted louder, and she appeared from behind a bush where she was looking at bees. For that brief time, I felt a terrible, visceral fear. It made me think of how a parent might respond if their child disappeared unexpectedly. Just as she had gone looking for bees, I began to imagine a story where something nefarious tempts the child, spiriting her away and leaving just enough of a lure for the parent to ignore rational thought and follow her. As you can see, Paul channeled that fear into a memorably horrible piece, because those tunnels still ring with noise, and that noise is not just trains. Used as bomb shelters, used as refuges, they're shot through with every kind of history, and every moment of their existence cuts through the loam of someone else's story. I can't help but think about the passing reference to the Romans making camp by the river in Neverwhere, or the ghosts of the underground industriously working away decades after they cease living, because the job still needs doing, even if you're dead. And if you don't notice you're dead, then who knows what else you don't notice. Down there, in the dark. Thanks to both, and to you, for joining us on this side of the street. If you like these stories, we've put some links to others that you might enjoy in the show notes. And if you like this episode, there are a lot of things that you could do to help us out. The one that's free is you could signal boost us a little bit. If you've listened on Spotify, rate us over there. If you've listened on basically any podcatcher with a review attachment, please consider writing us a review. Or if you like this episode, why not tweet about it or put it on Facebook or any of the other social media platforms out there. We are working very hard at the moment on trying to increase our social media presence, and you can really help with that. Alternatively, if you're feeling a little flush at the moment, we'd also really love to help out with that too. There are two ways that you can help out. I will stop saying help out in this spot shortly. Help out. There, I'm done. The first is if you go to pseudopod.org and click on Feed the Pod. There you can choose to either donate as much or as little as you want, or subscribe for as little as $5 a month, which gets you access to our premium content bucket. Alternatively, if you want to go to Patreon, you can also subscribe for as little as $5 a month, or get some pretty great stuff on the upper levels too, and again, gain access to the premium content bucket. Now, what are we doing with that money? We are paying our authors, we're paying our staff, and we're also working on building out our infrastructure for a whole bunch of projects we have coming down the line. And most importantly, at the moment with Patreon, we're trying to get to a goal which will allow us to raise our pay rate for authors. Without getting onto a particularly tall and difficult to get down from soapbox, it is my and the firm belief of the staff of EA that creatives as a whole are systemically undervalued in society, and one of the ways that we can deal with that is by increasing our pay rate for authors. So what we're looking at doing is bringing it into line with 8 cents a word, which is a 2-cent bump, which in an individual story isn't that much, but with 52 episodes a year times 4, it mounts up a little bit, hence the Patreon goal. So if you can help out with that, we would really appreciate it, and I know for a fact the authors would too. So, signal boosting, Patreon or PayPal. 1, 2, hell, 3 of them, if you're feeling generous, would really, really help us. And if you can help out, thank you. We'll be back next week with Last Week I Was Esther by Deborah L. Davitt and read by John Bell. Then, as now, Pseudopod will be a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. And we leave you with this quote from Don't Look Now by Daphne du Maurier. Oh, and the knowledge that E equals MC squared by Big Audio Dynamite contains a massively spoilery lyric for Don't Look Now. You're welcome. The soft humidity of the evening, so pleasant to walk about in earlier, had turned to rain. The strolling tourists had melted away. 1 or 2 people hurried by under umbrellas. This is what the inhabitants who live here see, he thought. This is the true life. Empty streets by night, the dank stillness of a stagnant canal beneath shuttered houses. The rest is a bright facade, put on for show, glittering by sunlight. We'll see you next week, folks. Until then, have fun.
Dressed for opening time. Show me bleeding where my love burns you breathing fire. The funeral is waking up from the summer's kiss. Damn the heavens for your roses are growing wilder now.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.